So thank you all. We have a really exciting project to talk about this morning. We're going to highlight a really wonderful public-private partnership that was designed to reforest one of California's state parks. And this is something that Director Coleman and I talked about several years ago, and I kind of lost track of it. So I'm really excited to hear all the details of how this came about and how we were able to work on a public-private partnership with a great partner, the Walt Disney Company. And I think you all know, or perhaps you don't know, but we had a devastating fire in 2003, the Cedar Fire, and it destroyed 95% of the conifer forest in California's treasured Cuyamaca State Park in San Diego. And we're going to examine how this public-private partnership and this project can serve as a model for future climate action through public-private partnerships. So I'm going to introduce our panel, and then the Disney company did a really beautiful video for us, so we'll see that video and then begin our discussions. First, we have Caryl Hart, who chairs the State Parks Commission, and Carol's the director of Sonoma County Parks, correct? And Bob Antonoplis, Assistant General Counsel for the Walt Disney Company. Thank you so much, Bob. And Laurie Wayburn, President of Pacific Forest Trust, and another board that I sit on, doing some very great work. And then we have Jason Clay, Senior Vice President with World Wildlife Fund. So with that, we have a short video are we ready to show that video? Am I going to be able to see it? Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Environmental stewardship and nature conservation are a rich part of Disney's history and a vital focus of our future. From our earliest nature films through the creation of the Disney Worldwide Conservation Fund, caring for our planet will always be a part of what makes Disney, Disney.
Disney started a program called the Climate Solutions Fund, which invests in projects that will reduce greenhouse gases, and we're doing projects all around the world. Our long-term goal is having a net zero direct greenhouse gas emissions for the Walt Disney Company worldwide, and we would achieve that in two ways. One, getting our business units who actually contribute to the fund based on their level of greenhouse gas emissions to reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions. And then secondly, for those emissions that can't be reduced, that we then use the fund to make up the difference and reduce greenhouse gas emissions through a variety of emission reduction projects, such as reforestation projects here.
We're located in the Peninsular Mountain Range. It's a little gem of 25,000 acres, within 3 hours drive of about 15 million people. Right now, we're at the top of Middle Peak in Cuyamaca Rancho State Park, and this is an area that used to be a sky island, forest habitat here, mixed conifers, and they used to be as tall and majestic, straight and thick as that area back down there where the trees are still standing.
There was a great fire that swept through this state park and through San Diego County called the Cedar Fire, and it engulfed 98% of the state park.
The fire was so hot that it got up into the trees, what we call a crown fire, meaning that it burned everything from the ground all the way to the very tops of the trees and killed all the cones, killed all the seeds, and burned the soil so much that any of the seed that was in the soil was destroyed.
We lost the seed bank on the forest floor, as well as the ability for the canopy to produce more cones. That means there were no cones and no seedlings to regenerate the new forest.
So in order to get conifers back in this area, the park decided they needed to plant them.
We try to pick projects that will deliver the most bang for the buck, reduce the most amount of greenhouse gas emissions for the least amount of money. Well, this project didn't meet our initial definition. It was a little more expensive because of the issues of clearing the brush and doing the site prep to plant the trees. And we went back and we talked about it, and we said, you know what, though? This is a state park. This is a unique project. The place needs reforestation help now. And even though it didn't meet our cost-effective criteria, it was a pretty easy decision for us. She said, we've got to do this project.
The Cuyamaca Rancho State Park was just devastated by this fire, and it was clear the state was not going to have the resources available to it in order to reforest that land. And already we had seen invasive species coming in and a real change in the landscape. And with the economic incentive that the carbon market brought to this project, private resources such as those from Disney were able to come in and ensure that that land was reforested with native species in a way that brings the land back to its original condition.
Historically, in the California State Park system, when the land experiences a wildfire, there has been no mechanism for reforestation and no mechanism for creating and carrying out a project of this size to help bring back this lost habitat. Thankfully, the merging of these two goals, restoring a vanishing habitat and a climate solution, the carbon sequestration, could come together and really make a whole integrated solution. These are the seedlings that we're planting. This is a Jeffrey pine, and these are native to this area. The planters are a professional planting crew. They can plant almost 1,000 seedlings a day.
The little seedlings that are now 6 inches tall, in 10 years, maybe 10 to 12 feet tall. And during that time, they will sequester carbon from the atmosphere and store it within themselves.
At the Climate Action Reserve, we wrote these rules for forestry to encourage economic action to restore habitats. And this is really the first and one of the best examples of private entities, in this case Disney, come together with the state of California to restore what was a devastated landscape using the rigorous rules that we promulgated for that purpose.
The greenhouse gases we reduce today, we may not see the impact for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but you got to do them now.
We have about 16,000 school children that come through the park, and some of those come through the Cuyamaca Outdoor School Camp.
We teach the kids about what happened and why the state parks is involved in reforestation, learning that everybody can have a positive impact on the environment, no matter how small that is.
Forest lands are not just valuable in and of themselves, they also provide a wide range of environmental or ecosystem benefits, including habitat for animals, watershed benefits for the waterways in the park itself. Forests, of course, help clean the air and provide valuable resources for recreation.
The Cedar Fire that went through in '03 really upset the balance of this place, and it would be great to see it back in its state, and hopefully this project will do a lot to further that goal.
It's a long-term project. They're slow-growing trees, but we're talking about affecting future generations that will be able to come back to this area and see what a sky island really looks like and see the diversity of habitat that now has come back to the area. I just like to thank the leadership of California State Parks in recognizing the importance of this habitat and restoring it, and helping us to find a way to fund it with partners like Disney. And I'd especially like to thank the experts on the reforestation team who are guiding this project and making this restoration effort a success.
It's wonderful to have in the state parks the subject matter experts that make a project like this happen, the biologists, the foresters, the park rangers, the people who know the land. A lot of disciplines have to come together to make a project like this a success, and we're just a small part of that.
If you can just listen, the wind has a wonderful way of whistling through the needles of pines, and to be able to walk through a forest where your footsteps are muted and the wind in the pines just sings, and that's what I'm happy to be contributing.
At Disney, we are dedicated to protecting nature and to helping create a brighter tomorrow for generations to come.
Very nice, beautiful. And I just want to say also, when I was at Cal EPA, we did lots of great projects with the Disney company, including the Environmentality Award every year. That was a lot of fun for me. I actually got to be in the Disney parade. So Caryl, let's start with you. If you would talk a little bit about the forest protocol and this project and the value to state parks of this partnership.
Thanks so much, Linda. Well, I'm very happy to be here to talk about this project, and I'm particularly happy to talk about such an upbeat project after the presentation we just had and how serious the situation is. I know we probably all need to have some good news. So the thing about this project is it involved a lot of partners, starting with our former park director, Ruth Coleman, and also Nancy Budge, Lisa Gonzalez-Kramer, who you saw in the video, Gail Severance and Mike Wells, and there continues to be a lot of state park staff, students, and universities involved. And of course, we'd like to acknowledge at State Parks the tremendous contribution of the Walt Disney Company, and also there was an initial financial contribution from American Forests, a nonprofit, and ConocoPhillips through a settlement in the state. So without repeating too much of what you saw on the video, I'm inevitably going to repeat some of it, but it probably bears repeating because it was such a significant event in California, the Cedar Fire. It started on October 25th, 2003, and it continued on through November 3rd. It burned over 270,000 acres. It killed 15 people. It burned thousands of houses before it was contained. And it burned most of Cuyamaca State Park, including what you saw, some of the last of these Sky Islands mixed montane conifer forest. In fact, prior to the fire, over 20%, or the park contained 20% of the remaining forest, and that was burned in the fire. There was a pre-planting inventory before this project began, and it showed that less than 6% of the sampled area was stocked with natural conifer regeneration. So it was the trees and it was the seeds that were wiped out by this fire. The interesting thing about this project, among other things, is that state parks exist and are managed to protect and enhance biodiversity, the exact thing that's being impacted by climate change, and sometimes there's a disconnect there. And that's why all of us at state parks felt that it was so important for state parks to step up and be part of the climate change solution. And just for an example, at Cuyamaca, first of all, it provides first-class outdoor recreation and all sorts of health and economic benefits and incredible natural resource value. Just for example, with regard to rare bird habitat up at Cuyamaca, there was spotted owl prior to the fire, red-breasted sapsucker, red-breasted nuthatch, golden crowned kinglet. There were 3 to 5 pairs of spotted owls that were at the park prior to the fire. None have been seen since that time. In addition, the park was a recreation resource for 3 million people live within an hour's drive. 15 million people live within a 3 hours drive of the park. And about 700,000 people came to the park before the fire, and afterwards that was reduced by about half. So it had so many different impacts. What makes this so interesting too is that it was during this, shortly after the fire, that the climate reserve was formed and stepped up, and there was an opportunity to begin looking at carbon offsets as a way to fund the potential reforestation and regeneration of the park. And just a brief note about what was going on in 2007 is the protocols for forestry were sort of in their second stage of evaluation, And there were two basic impediments to their use in California state parks. Number one, the early protocol contained a requirement of a conservation easement, which doesn't work for state parks because that kind of a legal restriction on parkland has a variety of problems that you probably, way more than you probably want to hear today. And there were other issues as well. So a group came together of 15 people, and I represented state parks on that committee, and we worked through the conservation easement and some of the other issues, which resulted in the adoption of a new protocol, a new forest protocol that allowed the participation of California state parks. And that CAR protocol has now been adopted by CAR and ARB as Forest Protocol 3.2. So, three initial conditions had to be met for this project to go forward. First, we had to show that reforestation of the park would be consistent with park resource management guidelines. We couldn't just go forward and plant in a way that was not without native plants and that wouldn't be a regeneration of the land. Sounds like I'm feeding back. Second, there had to be clear evidence that regeneration would not occur without the planting, which there was, and finally that the project wouldn't occur without carbon offset funding. But as it turned out, because all of the conifers and the seeds were destroyed, it was Cuyamaca, the project was perfect. Finally, parks had absolutely no funding to undertake the project without carbon offset funding. Remember, this was in the 2000s, and it's an era that continues today for parks. They're struggling, and parks has no statutes, there's no policies or guidelines that require or fund restoration or regeneration of parkland. Simply, without carbon offset funding, this park would not have a chance to see what we just saw in the video, this kind of reforestation. So funding of the project came initially through an agreement with CAL FIRE to provide forest expertise, supplies and crew. Subsequent donations came through a settlement of a lawsuit from ConocoPhillips. I guess may not be exactly a donation, but nevertheless, it did help jumpstart the project, and that contribution was required to be consistent with the CAR protocol. So all of these things sort of dovetailed as the project moved forward. And of course, since then, it's been through the support of corporate citizenship, most importantly, the Walt Disney Company, that additional funding toward the project budget has been raised. And clearly, as you've just seen in the video that the company produced, beyond the carbon offsets, it's the tremendous co-benefits of the project that interested them. Where else can you sequester nearly 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over the life of the project, educate over 16,000 school children every year about climate change, not to mention all the visitors to the park, accelerate forest recovery, reduce erosion risk, protect watershed function, and bring back the aesthetics of a park that provides economic stimulus, camping, hiking, equestrian use, mountain biking, and innumerable health benefits to potentially millions of Californians. I bet you're wondering, how can I be part of this wonderful project? Well, it's a testament to the successful innovation of all of the partners in this kind of public-private partnership, that all of the carbon credits of this project needed for this project have been sold. However, since this is an ecosystem restoration, there's much more that can be done through donations to the project. State Parks continues to work with Disney and other partners to identify funding to protect and buffer the area from future fires, to protect the genetic stock that survived the Cedar Fire, and to raise funds for scientific research to monitor the project's success as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caryl. And this is a really exciting project. It's such a creative solution to bring market forces to bear to restore public lands for multiple benefits. So, Bob, now we will turn to you to talk a little bit more detail about Disney's role in the project and how this came to your attention, and maybe your broader approach to engaging in public-private partnerships.
Thank you. As mentioned in the video, we have a corporate social responsibility program called the Climate Solutions Fund, in which we charge our business units for our their carbon emissions. We actually have an internal price on carbon within the Walt Disney Company worldwide. So what you emit is on an annual basis, you pay into the fund, and it impacts your business unit's profit and loss statement, if you will. And then the three of us get to spend that money and get to identify projects. And that's been quite an adventure for us. We've had some wonderful partnerships that have been established, both with international organizations like Nature Conservancy, Conservation International, great local NGOs such as Tree People, who played an instrumental role in bringing the Cuyamaca project to Disney. And then, of course, our partnerships with both the state government and with the federal government, because we did a similar reforestation project literally in my backyard in La Cañada, California, for the Station Fire, which ravaged so much of LA County a couple of years ago. So we do create this pot of money, and it's a voluntary program, if you will. So these are projects that are done in the voluntary market, and we have our standards of review and the usual internal stuff, and I get kind of final say on which projects the company gets to do, and it's been really a fantastic experience for us. We've been able to do a lot of different type of projects. At Disney, we love forestation projects because as part of our environmental corporate social responsibility program, we also have goals in ecosystem protection, habitat protection, watershed protection, and reforestation is a wonderful way of knocking off more than one goal with one project. And so we love reforestation projects and are always looking for more to do in the right places.
Uh-oh. Microphone.
Okay. So, this project was brought to us. There's a wonderful LA-based environmental group, Tree People, that's very active in the urban reforestation program. I serve on their board, and we were working with them to try to identify a project that we could do together somewhere in Southern California, and the Cuyamaca project was the one that came up through the initial legwork by Deborah and others at Tree People. And then we went down and saw the site and saw how ravaged it is. One of the things you don't really appreciate from the video showed how badly it looked. That fire was in 2003, and this video was done in January. So 10 years later, it's still looking pretty bad. And that the Cuyamaca Rancho State Park just would not regenerate on its own. And we just felt that it was a project that was worth doing, and it was great working with the California State Parks on this one. Great partners, a lot of subject matter experts within the state parks to make this project go. One of the things we learned from the Angeles National Forest Project, you just don't plant trees and go away. There is so much work that happens after the seedling goes in the ground. Annual monitoring, clearing out. There's a whole lot of tree biology that happens after you plant the trees. It's not just simple, plant and where are my offsets. So a lot of work has to happen, and in order to make a reforestation project successful. And it was just great learning about these from all these steps that need to happen from the subject matter experts within state parks and within the U.S. Forest Service as well. So it's been a great project for us, and we're just a small part of it, and it's wonderful having the support of our senior management that allows a program like this to go forward. It was a big deal when we presented the concept of taxing for creating an internal tax on our company's carbon emissions, but it was embraced by our senior management, and it's just been a go ever since. And this is just one of many projects that we've funded with it, and we're thrilled how it turned out. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you for all your efforts with the Disney company. It sounds like you're doing some really great things. So now we're going to turn to Laurie Wayburn, and Laurie, why don't you tell us a little bit about Pacific Forest Trust and the role of forestry in climate change and maybe some of the partnerships that you're working on.
Well, thank you. You know, Cuyamaca is a wonderful project, and I want to just take a brief minute to thank Ruth, and I think everybody here should thank her for what she has done in helping catalyze the reforestation and protection of Cuyamaca with this project. Well, I'm actually going to slightly shift us, shall we say, from the trees to the forest. They always say, you know, got to see the forest for the trees, and that's what I want to do in my brief time here on this conversation. And Linda mentioned in the opening that she is a member of our board, and we're exceedingly proud to have her as part of our board of directors. Our role in this whole discussion, I have to tell you, coming to this affair today, I thought back 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when we had just passed the legislation to incorporate forests into California's voluntary climate program. And although when we were listening to Laurie and you could see that J-stick hockey curve and go, oh my God, I want you to take your mind back 10, 12 years when we were a group of people lining up in Sacramento to get Sacramento to listen to us about the power that forests had to affect climate. Because forests are not just victims. I don't know how many of you remember those wonderful but heart-rending photographs of, you know, women from Africa and Asia about women as victims of violence. But forests are usually projected as victims of climate change. But just like those women, those ads said, we are powerful. Forests are powerful. And forests can be that very powerful tool to actually take that J-stick curve of emissions going up and not only stop it from going higher, but pull it down. And this project is a great example of what we were able to do just 10, 12 years ago. The change has been like that hockey stick, but in the right direction. At that point, people said, oh yeah, forests are important, but not for climate. I mean, that'll just be greenwashing. There isn't the science, there isn't the will, there isn't the data, there isn't the methodology, there isn't the verification, there isn't the transparency. We're going to deal with this problem through energy. But when you realize that 1/3 to 40% of all the excess CO2 in our atmosphere is from forest loss and from forest degradation, you go, can't get there without having forests be part of the solution. And it isn't about greenwashing. It's about solving real problems. So California showed it could solve a real problem. We showed we could develop that protocol. I'm proud to be part of the organization that sponsored that legislation, that developed the first protocol, that worked with Diane, with the registry, with Linda to make this happen, and that it became flexible and more practical over time to where now it is not only the best voluntary system, it's the best regulatory system in the world to have compliance offsets with forests. And Gary's done an incredible job building on what Diane did to make that happen. So going from the project to the sector, first we were able to address forests as part of the solution just by doing projects. But think about it. In the United States, it's actually really interesting. 1/3 of California is forested, 1/3 of the United States is forested, 1/3 of the terrestrial systems of the globe are forested. And in every case, we've lost about 1/3 to 40% of them. So you can actually go from California to the globe and think about California not only as a political example of willpower and ingenuity, as a technological example, but as a biological example. So would you think, so look at forest loss in the United States. We lose 1.45 million acres of forest a year, according to the Forest Service. Forest Service was part of getting a Nobel Prize for climate change work with forests. I believe their data. They say that's going to continue. We'll have at least a 50 million acre loss by 2050. So you look at that and go, that's a lot of CO2 emissions. An acre of forest loss is about 58 car years. So that's an average. It's a low part of the average because that's the average including all of our sparsely forested forests and our public forests, and our private forests are actually the ones that have a lot more carbon on them. Those are the ones we lose, and particularly we lose them here in California and the Northwest and the Southeast. Those have the most carbon of any in the US. So that's a low number. You add that up and you go, gosh, you know what that total is? At the low end of the range, it's more than residential, all residential emissions. At the high end of the range, it's more than all industrial emissions. Can you imagine us saying, gosh, we're going to address the problem of CO2 emissions from industrial and residential emissions by doing offset projects only? Well, you'd probably go, no, we'd want a strategy. We want a strategy to go for that sector, and projects are terrific, but we need a strategic approach to bring those emissions down, and with forests you get a double, triple, quadruple benny, because you can stop forest loss. That's actually in AB 32, no net loss. You can increase emissions, and California is so perfectly, increase sequestration. you can increase emissions and you can choose not to, but you can increase sequestration at the best time in these forest lives, when they are packing on more carbon every year than they did the year before for the next 40 to 50 years. Pretty cool. And in doing that, you can improve, as our other speakers have said, water quality, habitat. You can reduce the amount and intensity of forest fire. You can actually also increase renewable low carbon energy. So you sit there and you go, let's have a strategic approach to forests and not just look at the top of the iceberg, which is offset projects. We need offset projects. You can see at this conference, I mean, it's amazing. Now we have sales people, sales booths, trinkets you can take home to your kids. We've made it in the real world. We're a real economic force. Now let's go and really get out there and attack the millions and millions of tons that we need in order to really address climate change. So California can do this. We have the science, we have the technology, we have the implementing methodologies, we have the monitoring, we have the verification, we have the reporting, we have the Air Resources Board, which I've got to say, I worked in international government for a long time. I've worked in the nonprofit sector. I have my share of bureaucratic stories. The Air Resources Board is one fantastic agency. And hats off to this state for having an agency you can trust. Hats off to this state for having the courage to address climate change as it needs to be. With forests, we are now poised with all those little pieces of the puzzle, also with the revenues out of AB 32, to actually develop strategies and implementation and targeting for each of the emission sectors to go above and beyond the targets set by AB 32. And that is what forests can bring to the table as well. We can set targets for number one, how we achieve no net loss. Number two, how we increase total sequestration. Number three, how we do reforestation. And number four, how we can create low carbon energy and low carbon substitution for things like steel, which have such a high intensity over their lifetime through forest work. And in doing so, we save our watersheds, we create rural economies, we save our wildlife, and not only Larry gets to put that picture up there of one heck of an adorable grandchild, but we all do. So I thank you for this opportunity to talk about how we have these building blocks, which is what we have accomplished here. Cuyamaca epitomizes it, and how we can now go from the trees to the forest.
Thank you very much, Laurie. So we've gone from the trees to the forest, and now we're going to go global. So we would like Jason to talk about how this relates to the global issue. We know that deforestation is about 20% of our global emissions, and how does this experience relate to some of your efforts on the global stage?
Okay.
Thank you, Jason.
So there's a saying in Africa that goes, you can't wake a person who's pretending to sleep. And I think it's time that we wake up to the reality of this planet that we live on. We've heard about the project, we've heard about the sector, and now I want to talk about the threats to the sector. We did a little bit of analysis, and we found that for the 35 places that we think are the most important from a biodiversity and ecosystem service point of view on the planet, the biggest threats to those places were 15 commodities, bar none, far bigger than any other threats. And 100 companies touch 25% of the trade of all 15 of those commodities. So we began to see a strategy here. And we started looking at this in a different way. If you want to affect a threat, particularly to forest, you don't necessarily hire foresters. You might hire farmers, and you might hire people with banking experience and people who understand how to zone and develop land use plans. And so that's what we began to do. But fundamentally what this means is that we have changed, at least at World Wildlife Fund, the way we work. Agriculture is the biggest threat today to the planet. And if we don't get it right, we can turn out the lights and go home. And it's only going to get worse. Agricultural sprawl is already among us. 6% more land was added to the agriculture and food and fiber estate in the last decade than was there previously. And this is coming at the expense mostly of forest, but other natural habitats as well. So in the last 23 years, 100 countries have taken land out of protection, out of national parks. That's a trend we do not want to see going forward. And yet, if it comes to a choice of feeding your kid or cutting the tree, we're going to protect our kids every time. And that's the dilemma we want to avoid. There's another little backdrop here that I think most people don't get, and that's the kind of speed of life at this point. It took the UK 155 years to double GDP with 9 million people. It took China 12 years to double GDP with 1 billion people. And that's the new norm. That's the reality. China brought 400 million people out of poverty. Now that's a good thing. But the environmental impacts of that with a business as usual scenario are not a good thing. We've got to figure out how to change those. So we have to produce in the next 40 years as much food as we have in the last 8,000. That's the projection. That's the reality. And the question is how we're going to do that without losing more forest, more wetlands, more savannas, etc. So we work with 55 of those 100 largest companies to get their supply chains straightened out, to get them not to source from deforested areas, to get them to buy certified products of these 15 commodities that we've found to be the most important. And what we've found is that they're actually willingly moving along this course because they're worried. They're worried that there isn't going to be enough product in the future. They're not going to have access to resources. They're going to get tarred with a reputational image that they don't want to live with, buying from palm oil estates that eliminate orangutan habitat, or that eliminate tiger habitat, or that affect elephants, etc. So there's a lot of work that we're doing with individual companies, but I would say that the company that has made the single largest commitment going forward, and I just think it ought to be put on the table, is Unilever. They have committed that by 2020, 100% of all their bio-based natural raw materials will be certified. That's 3,500 raw materials, and they haven't got a clue how they're going to get there. But they thought it was the only credible thing to do. They know how they're going to get there with 70%, and now they want to move even further. But the other big shift, I think, that we're seeing is that companies are seeing sustainability as a pre-competitive issue. Walmart is not big enough to change a market in the world by itself. None of them are. They've got to start working together. And so they're redefining, if you will, what is collusion. Collusion is about pricing and about how you sell your market and market access and market share and what you're saying. That's the things you could collude on. Whether there are raw materials or not, that's an issue that everybody depends on having access to those raw materials. So we now have 18 companies that launched an initiative in the Consumer Goods Forum to take deforestation out of their supply chains. That's 4 commodities in 4 countries, and it represents half of all the deforestation on the planet today. Palm oil, soy, beef, and pulp for pulp and paper. Now those 18 companies have turned to 57 companies, and that is moving forward. And because those companies took that stand, 10 banks have said, well, if you can take deforestation out of your supply chain, We think lending to those people is a good risk. Lending to your suppliers is a good risk, so we're going to take deforestation out of our lending portfolios. Bank of America, Standard Chartered, Barclays, etc. And they've now developed a tool that the International Chamber of Commerce, which regulates global trade, has signed off on that would allow you to add a certificate to every letter of credit, every trade transaction that shows whether the product is sustainable or not, whether it's been certified, whether deforestation occurred or not. And that will be attached to that product as it moves through the trade system. One final thing is that these companies' purchasing power can actually make a difference. So the consumer goods forum companies that have made this commitment, they buy $20 to $25 billion of those 4 commodities a year. And they have now pledged those purchases so that banks will lend to the producers and that they can work with certifiers as well. Well, recently we started talking with the World Bank and said, we would like to turn this agricultural frontier, this arc of deforestation, on itself. Let's turn the momentum of this backwards and start rehabilitating land that we've abandoned and degraded. And part of that can be rehabilitated back into wildlife corridors and riparian areas and steeper slopes that shouldn't be farmed. And part of it can be made into much more productive farmland. And so we have a target now of 250 million hectares by 2030 to be rehabilitated. And these companies have put up their actual purchases as collateral that can be used to drive that forward. So the producers have guaranteed markets. Anyway, let me stop there and we can have a discussion.
Thank you very much, Jason. That's very, very interesting, and I just want to commend all of you for the fabulous work that you're doing in this area. This was something I recall, I think Eileen Tutt, my former climate deputy, is in the room, and I recall when Eileen and I went to our first UN climate conference in Nairobi, Kenya, and that's been numerous years ago. And this whole idea of bringing forestry into the carbon market was just a new idea, and we were so wowed about the idea, and gee, wouldn't it be great that if we could actually do that? So it's really encouraging to see it's happening, and the international efforts, Jason, are tremendous. So we are very close to running out of time, so I think I will then open to any questions from the audience. And I see Wendy.
Hi, I have a question, I guess, for Jason. It's hard to fathom that agriculture would be a bigger threat than fossil fuels, but maybe something related to some of Laurie's comments about both sides of the forest issue. There's been a lot of talk about food waste, and what might be the opportunities in trying to address food waste and using that to try to meet the food demand issue.
So just on your first comment, deforestation related to clearing land for farming is equal to all transportation emissions on the planet. Then you have soil emissions. Then on top of that, you have input emissions, and then you have methane from rice and livestock and other things. All in, it's about a third of global emissions. So it is huge, and we've got to figure out how to bring carbon back into farming, in soil carbon, in forest, and in other ways. The other issue about waste is very important. We waste a third of all calories produced today. Whether you're in a developing country or in the US or Europe, it's always about 30 to 40%. It's for different reasons, but if we could eliminate waste, that would equal half of the new food we need to produce by 2050. Wow. Or to think about it another way, if we could eliminate waste, it would reduce our net greenhouse gas emissions, our net water use, our net fertilizer use, our net pesticide use by 50%. That's what the waste does. It compounds the impacts. And so eliminating that waste, and we're not going to eliminate waste, but can we cut it in half? Could we actually cut it in half? Yeah, that's doable. So that's already a quarter of all the new food we need. That gets us much closer to where we need to get.
Wow. Thank you. And Laurie, you wanted to add
Just
something?
another take on that issue. We have deforestation that happens in California as we turn more lands into vineyards. I like a good glass of wine. I think many people do. But looking at it from the point of view of, are we taking the acres we should? You know, are we strategically looking at where are we going to grow or not grow? Where are we going to have deforestation or not deforestation? Is really a good one we can start with right at home. And the other cycle to this about waste, you think about forest waste. We do have forest waste. We have it when we do restoration. We should turn that into energy. And so this closed loop cycle that you're talking about is so important because we know for many of our forests, whether it's here, the rest of the US, the rest of the world, we actually need to be managing them to restore them, to make them more adaptive. What do you do with that waste material? It's too much in many cases to just leave on the forest floor. It should go back into the cycle as low carbon fuel, but do it from that whole cycle accounting point of view, which California is uniquely poised to do because we have a cross-economic sectoral approach to inventory and accounting. And in this next stage of AB 32, that's going to come into play. It's a great way to think about waste as a closed loop.
Just one question for probably Jason. What do you do about the difference between our industrial world and, for instance, Indonesia, the difference even between the Malaysian side of Borneo and the Kalimantan side, where there's just rampant destruction?
I'm sorry, can you speak closer to the mic?
Sorry. What do you do about the problem of the non-industrial country? Taking Indonesia and you look at Borneo, the Malaysian side is almost solid palm oil. There's still forests on the south, but they're coming. It just makes you sick when you watch them coming down. But what do you do about it?
So I think that we've done studies both in Borneo and in the Cerrado and the Amazon in Brazil looking at degraded land. And the studies show that it is quite profitable to turn degraded land into really productive farmland. And I'm not talking about degraded forest. I'm actually talking about land that has been farmed, so it's all the way down to no trees, no seeds, etc. The studies have shown that we could double palm oil production, soy production, and beef production without cutting a single tree for the next 25 years. And that is important to know, that there is that potential. Now, that's why we want to bring the banks to this to show that there is a financial way forward here. But we've got to start digging into those kinds of solutions to get more from less. With 9 billion people, the per capita impacts of consumption have got to be reduced from what they are today, and today they're not sustainable, with 7 billion. So we've just got to look at what's coming at us in the future. It's a big issue.
Thank you.
If we could figure out a credible soil carbon measure and payment system for farmers, that would be the holy grail. Because that soil carbon is probably the single best indicator of sustainable agriculture. Reduces water use by half, reduces pesticide use by half, reduces fertilizer use by half, increases productivity, increases the land value for the farmer. That is the holy grail. So can we make it permanent? Don't know. How are we going to measure that? Those are the questions that we need to start asking, I think. And maybe in 5 or 10 years, we'll have answers.
We'll be there. Thank you. Yes?
Thank you. This is a question for Jason also. Would you let us know what the 15 commodities are and or where we can find that information?
Yeah, you can actually, the ones that are related to deforestation are beef, soy, palm oil, timber, and pulp. So it's 5 of the 15. The others are involved with water use, with fisheries, with pesticide toxicity, and other things like that. And you can find them if you just Google my name and TED. You can watch for 17 minutes a talk that lays out the whole strategy.
Thank you.
Hi there, Kathleen Ave from the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. I know you're all starving, but I have a question for Bob, and I really appreciated hearing about this project. It's fascinating, and to think about what might be to come. But as far as Disney's program, I find it really interesting that you chose to implement a carbon tax on your business units. You're a multinational, world-class company, and I suppose you could have implemented a trading scheme among your units, but you chose a tax, which is interesting. So could you talk a little bit more about how that program works, how much money you're raising every year, and then also in this case, what was the total cost of this project and the cost per ton? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. The carbon tax is, we have a group that maintains and on an annual basis our carbon footprint, and it's assigned on a sector basis, a business unit, parks and resorts, consumer products, studios, all our business units, ESPN, cruise ships, and then they are charged. It varies year to year. It's around $10, $11, $12 a ton. It's a little bit less than what the European market is, but it's about that amount, and then it goes into a pot of money. One of the things, there was an earlier panel that talked about carbon tax versus cap and trade. One of the things that we saw right away with the carbon tax, and I'm not taking sides in the debate, but when you put a negative cash flow or a negative economic impact on a business unit that's trying to show what much they're growing and how positive their economic performance is, we saw an immediate dose response in behavior from those business units. The cruise lines started looking at currents in the Caribbean and optimizing their route length, and actually were able to save fuel being able to coast more and be a little more energy efficient and taking shorter routes between the ports on the various cruise stops, something they would have never have done on their own, but when they were hit with this carbon tax, which made them look bad on their balance sheet or was a cost on their balance sheet, they wanted to recoup some of that money. And we saw every one of our business units react instantly that way. So, for those, I think, who are in favor of a carbon tax, you do get at least within our company, we saw an immediate behavioral change when they were hit with this line item cost of corporate allocation to fund the Disney Climate Solution Fund. So, for us it worked, and we've seen a tremendous behavioral change, and every business unit is looking at reducing their carbon emissions. A cruise line has tasked one of our energy engineers within our environmental research and development group to do a 2-year project on researching alternative fuels for a cruise ship, biofuels, algae fuels, whatever, because that's going to be their holy grail, if you will, on reducing their carbon footprint. Obviously, you're not going to put a nuclear-powered cruise ship anytime soon. So, and they're kind of stuck burning carbon-based fuels, but they are thinking really hard, and it's being driven solely by the carbon tax that we at the Walt Disney Company and the corporate parent are imposing on our business units that burn fuels.
Thank you. Wow.
One last question.
Okay, I think, do we have time for one more? One more quick question.
Okay, this is for you, Linda. My name is Edgar. I'm from the California Compost Coalition, and we highly supported the Climate Action Reserve having food waste to compost protocol and food waste anaerobic digestion. The next initiative is compost use and biochar use for the farmers to do the holy grail. What type of activity do you think the Climate Action Reserve will be doing to have these new protocols and moving these protocols from the Climate Action Reserve to the CARB regulatory protocol development?
I think, I think that's probably a pretty long answer, and I think Gary's the one to talk about that. Gary, I don't know if we want to do that offline or if you want to come up and talk for a minute. Okay. Well, thank you all. This has really been fascinating. I learned a lot, and I'm so thrilled about this project and the success.